Okay, let's see.
Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again. Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again.
Ain't trying to argue with them. He talking Marxism, critical race theory. Yeah, I'm getting weary.
Say they names,
But a man died.
George Floyd,
Did that move you?
Breonna Taylor, and all the church could do was debate you. There's gotta be more. The people that's supposed to be light on the hill, we just sit back and chill. We get on our Twitter and say how we feel, pushing the propaganda of a tyrant. Look at them people protesting, they violent. Popular preachers, they seem to go silent. That's when I notice we stuck on the island. Yeah. We supposed to be an embassy, heaven on earth, the remedy. Fighting the white supremacy, serving our neighbor with empathy. Yeah. Now that I know what I know, I can't stay right here no more. Feel like he calling the church on the boat. Sayonara to the shore.
Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again. Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again.
I started connecting the dots, finding out who was the ops. Preaching American Christianity as if it was biblical style. Is 2020 like a test? Correct. Am I being finessed by institutional Christianity? They really nationalists. So what does it mean to be Christian, huh? Just focus on personal piety, get my theology right and ignore the injustice in the society. They call it the social gospel when you speak out on police brutality, but in reality it's a political agenda. They push a mentality. I'm setting my sail, leaving the island. I'm feeling like I am myself. I'm feeling like Bonhoeffer, Mr. Cornell, or Ida B. Wells. If our good works glorify, our God in heaven lift them high. The true church will arise while the institutional one dies.
Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again. Well, I'm about to set myself. Find me on the water, gone with the wind. Some just ain't right. I see the falling lights. I don't know, but I ain't never coming back again. Oh, bye.
On May 10, 1933, in dozens of cities across Germany, students and Nazi Party officials gathered books they had deemed subversive and un-German, and stood in lines, waiting to throw the tomes into the flames of raging bonfires Nazi soldiers had set in the middle of town squares across the country. Upwards of 80,000 books were burned that night. The act was a concerted and symbolic effort to tell the people of Germany and the people of the world that a new Germany was being born, a pure Germany. That night, the students that were gathered around the flames swore an oath to combat and destroy subversive and un-German literature. 6 years later, Germany would invade Poland, starting what would become the deadliest conflict in world history. In the apocryphal words of German poet Heinrich Heine, whose books were burned that night, along with books by Ernest Hemingway, Helen Keller, and Jack London, where they burn books, they will also ultimately burn people. Why are conservatives so obsessed with banning books? We've already seen that children are the ones who lose the most when adults fight over what books are appropriate for them. They lose out when it comes to their freedom of speech and expression. They lose out on the fundamental human development that comes when you're exposed to new and different ideas. And they lose out on the power of representation and seeing someone who looks like you reflected in your books and media. And they lose out because instead of focusing on their education, their educators have to focus on a small faction of vocal, angry parents who are making their lives hell hell, and now potentially maybe going to literal prison. This is not about the children. This is about power and control at the expense of the children. This is about imposing a specific worldview that conservatives fear is being lost. Because it is. We've moved beyond the idea that America is a perfect nation, land of the free, home of the brave. We all know the American dream is dead. And thank God. Now, instead of parading around pretending we live in some capitalist utopia, we can actually roll up our sleeves and have difficult conversations, including with our children, about what the world actually looks like for them. And that world includes non-binary kids, and lesbian moms, and sex, and violence, and racism, and yes, even gay penguins.
Educator referred to a black child as a slave during class. They're going to learn at some point. In Harris County, Texas, an educator told black honors student she could have been sold down south while teaching a lesson on slavery. During a press conference on April 5th, the girl's mother is calling for firing. The teacher had used her as an example of a fugitive slave, the mother said. Now, you may be saying, well, Doc, that is inappropriate. Maybe it was a good faith mistake. All right. Well, how about this? This wasn't the first time this educator has been caught up going off script. Her beliefs about the antebellum period got in trouble. The teacher allegedly told the class the Confederate flag was a symbol of Southern pride and had nothing to do with slavery. See, that's exactly what the KKK says about it. I'm keeping it 100. That is what they say about it. There's more. And was about states' rights. Two facts many of the history books have wrong. There should be no question. The educator should not educate children.
I am 13 and my name is Winston. I don't think this should be banned. This is just a history book that's for children. I could see people seeing this as like different than what I'd see it as, because it says used for United States. This story is tough. The birth of a nation was deadly for us. Like, I could see people thinking of that as a negative, like, being shady towards the United States. I don't see that way. I think it's just telling the truth here. I think it's just history. It's very important to have books like that or resources like that because people don't know who they are. They need to know who they are and how and why they are. I don't think it's going to make me feel bad about myself. I think it's going to make me feel I can change things that aren't right.
The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas is the book that's caused a stir in the community and on Twitter. Thomas's award-winning young adult novel is about a young African-American girl who juggles life in a poor neighborhood but goes to a suburban prep school. The girl sees a white police officer shoot her unarmed best friend. Today, the book has been pulled off the shelves in Katy ISD after a parent complained about its language and content.
I had a child that came to me and said that I didn't think I should be reading this book.
Parent Anthony Downs read excerpts to the board.
The F word, and I will not repeat that here, but it is spelled out in the book. I wish he wasn't that kind of busy. I stopped at page 13 of 444. My question to this board is who reviews the books that go into junior high school?
Some parents say the book had educational value.
I think it deprives them of a different kind of experience that they probably will never know in their own lives, and I think it's enlightening.
Others say,
I don't have an issue with the African American, like I want that out and about with kids, but I do have an issue with cussing and things like that.
Around the country, efforts to ban specific books or even whole categories of books are on the rise.
There's a long history of book controversies in this country, says PEN America CEO Suzanne Nossel. What books do you see most affected? Where's the impact?
It's overwhelmingly books by and about people of color and LGBTQ individuals. So it can be stories about a transgender kind of coming of age story, stories about slavery, about Black Americans and the Black experience and racial injustice in this country. So those kinds of narratives that are something other than kind of a pure, very traditional, what some people might think of as a standard old school American story.
And I'm sure you've thought about sort of why now? I mean, what happens in the culture to bring something like this to the fore?
I think it's a product in part of demographic and political and cultural change that is afoot in this country. We're becoming a much more pluralistic country without any one single dominant racial group. And there's a backlash to that. There's a sense that something is being lost, that the way people grew up, the stories that they read, the world that they saw decades ago is changing and maybe changing too quickly. And that can be seen as threatening.
Texas has banned more books than any other state.
438. That's the number of books banned in Texas during the first half of the school year, according to PEN America.
How many of the 4 books have you reviewed that you felt should not be in the school system?
None.
She's not a mom for liberty, but still a liberty-minded mom.
I'm a combat veteran, right? There's no way I went to Iraq thinking that when I moved back home, I would have to do this to make sure that the freedom that we fight for in this country is taken out of the hands of students.
The board president called slain gay rights activist Harvey Milk a pedophile when the board banned a social studies textbook for elementary school students.
Yeah, my question is why even mention a pedophile?
He's not a pedophile.
I beg to differ.
The governor tweeted, quote, "An offensive statement from an ignorant man. This isn't Texas or Florida," the governor said. "In the Golden State, our kids have this freedom to learn. Congrats, Mr. Komrosky. You have our attention. Stay tuned." Here's how Joseph Komrosky responded just moments ago.
Governor Newsom, I'm glad that I have your attention. Now you have mine. I assure you that I am anything but ignorant regarding what you've said. Governor, you said it right when you said this isn't Texas or Florida, as we can be so much better than these states if we had better leadership from the top levels of government who actually...
Well, just moments ago, the governor responded in a statement saying, in part, California is closely watching the actions of malicious actors seeking to ban books, whitewash history, and demonize the LGBTQ+ community in Temecula and across the state. If the law is violated, there will be repercussions.
Should parents have a say?
There should be facilitation of collaboration between students.
Should parents have a say?
Parents should be working with students and educators to be making decisions.
That's Cameron Samuels, a Katy ISD graduate, testifying before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee this month, addressing the growing number of book bans in a now viral clip.
I stood up for my freedoms, but my school district removed age-relevant books at record pace.
Why is this so important to you? I felt obligated to call to light the censorship because it was harming me and harming many of my peers.
Now, as the executive director, Samuel says the group, which hasn't even been around a year, won't stop fighting for what they believe in.
We aren't advocating for inappropriate materials in elementary school libraries like these senators were telling us. But what we are advocating for is that they stop fear-mongering, stoking fear on books.
Samuels, along with Hayden Cohen and Zara Bakrin, took the trip to D.C., also as an opportunity to speak with lawmakers about other issues impacting students.
In Florida last year, 3 laws were passed aimed at controlling access to information and educational materials. The Parental Rights in Education Act constrains instruction on gender and sexuality in schools, which has led school libraries to remove books with LGBTQ characters in an attempt to comply. Approval is now required by certified media specialists before books and materials are allowed back into schools to ensure each book is age-appropriate and free of pornographic content. It has led to the banning and removal of a sweeping range of books, including, interestingly, Ernest Hemingway, Helen Keller, and Jack London. Is it a coincidence that some of the same books burned by the Nazis are now being banned by a vocal minority of parents and lawmakers, hell-bent on shoving their ideology down the throats of everyone around out of fear that their children might be introduced to ideas that don't conform to their sanitized, inaccurate, white supremacist version of history? I don't think so. The current book bans that are sweeping the United States are a symptom of a larger problem, one that's repeated itself throughout history, wherever one group sought to impose religious, moral, or political control over the masses. This is a problem that implicates First Amendment freedoms, human rights, and the ability of future generations to think for themselves.
Why should 13 people get to decide what books tens of thousands of children get to read?
Well, I'm thinking it's probably because those 13 people saw what some of the content was in the books. I mean, explicit graphic sexual content. And I'm happy to talk about some of that content if you'd like to.
Well, this is the question again. The books that are being banned, I want to give you just
No books are being banned.
No, hold on a second.
Well, no, Joy, but I want to be clear. No one's banning books. Write the book, print the book, publish the book, put the book in the public library, sell the book, right? We're talking about a public school library. Children don't have unfettered access to the internet at school. I did a FOIA records request, and I wanted to see what kinds of internet sites are banned in schools, if we're going to talk about banning, right? And the subject matter in the books that moms are concerned about are the same things that kids don't have access to on the internet.
What is the expertise that you have and other Moms for Liberty advocates have to decide that a book, an award-winning book like All Boys Aren't Blue, isn't appropriate for students to read? What is your expertise?
What a tragic story of a young man who's anally raped by his adult family member. So you have incest, rape, pedophilia. Joy, you said you'd let me answer, so I'm going to answer
Please
for you. In what context is a strap-on dildo acceptable for public school? Just, I mean, that's my question to you. Tell me what the context around the strap-on dildo or the rape of a minor child by a teacher.
Hold on a second.
No,
wait,
we're talking about public school.
One moment.
All right.
So now you've asked me questions.
Sure.
I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
Well, who is the main character? What's the name of the main character in All Boys Aren't Blue?
You're asking me right now.
You just gave me very specific information about this book, so you're presenting yourself as somebody expert.
It's the gentleman.
Hold on. Who's the main character in the book?
The main character is the author.
What's his name?
George, I believe, is his first name.
Because you're giving me very specific information that is.
You're asking me to remember the name of an author.
You just remembered very specific names.
Joy.
Here's my question.
We're talking about
Here's my question.
You didn't answer my question.
No. I'm going to answer your question.
Great. I would love to hear that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm interviewing you, and you're not interviewing me. So let's just make sure it's a conversation. Okay.
Great.
So what I'm saying to you is that as you are not an expert in this book,
I don't have to be an expert to know that dildos aren't appropriate for public school. I mean, come on, let's get real.
This book is a full context story, as you said, of the author's experience. Why is it your right, or a Moms for Liberty activist's right, to say that a parent who wants their child to have access to this book, which gives a personal experience of this author, why doesn't a liberal parent, for instance, or a parent of an LGBTQ kid, why don't they have a right for their child to just have access to this book? Why is it your right to say they can't?
So, again, we're talking about incest, rape, and pedophilia.
And each parent, each parent has to decide what is appropriate for their child to read. So I want you to answer. I'm going to ask you one more time. What is your right to tell a parent who wants their child, who might feel seen by this story, why don't they have the right? Why don't they have the right as a parent to say, my child can have access to this book?
If a child feels seen by this story, that means that they have been the victim of a predator. That means that they have either been raped by a family member, they've experienced
and your proof of that is what?
You just said that
What's
if a child feels seen by this story.
What I'm saying, Joy, you're now making assumptions about it.
But if a child has been raped, we should do a lot better than put a book on a library
Now you're literally
shelf.
creating a story behind a child that you don't know.
We are in a particular moment of a very, very, very long war. There is not a period in American history where African-American literacy enjoys the total and complete freedom and support of the state. That's just not a tradition that I come from. The enemies of equality, the enemies of freedom, have always recognized that the first thing you attack when you want to strip people of their rights is the imagination, their ability to imagine those rights in the first place. And books are just an excellent, exceptional, maybe our best technology for conveying that. If you leave it up to the approved corpus of literature of the state, and you're Black, it's very easy to wind up loathing yourself, hating yourself, detesting yourself. Because many of the myths, the ideas, the tropes that this country holds dear, the heroes, people it worships, are not merely casually racist, but their racism is foundational to who they are. You have to see the book bans in concert with the assault, on voting rights, for instance, with the assault on protests, and in Florida passing laws that allow folks to drive vehicles into protests and not be prosecuted. You have to see it all in concert, all in working together. I would argue you got to see it, in concert with these laws that increasingly strip women of bodily autonomy. If you can stop people from imagining things that exist beyond, this narrow box, and then on top of that, if you can restrict their ability to make political choices by restricting their ability to vote, then you got them at both ends, right? Because on the one hand, they can't imagine a different world, and even within the restricted world that you created, they might not even be able to exercise choice.
After the murder of George Floyd, sales of Black books skyrocketed. For a window of time, people really wanted to hear what Black authors had to say. And then, they dramatically did not want to hear anymore. Not only did sales slow, but there are now efforts to ban many of these books that were so celebrated a little over a year ago.
In Texas, there was a mother who halted author presentation by Jerry Kraft by claiming falsely that New Kid represented critical race theory.
New Kid? Yeah, like from my book, the graphic novel?
New Kid.
New Kid is a book my children read. It's about a 12-year-old Black boy who goes to a new school.
Jerry was scheduled to give author presentation to the kids in Katy, Texas, and they lined up this big event. All the kids were anticipating meeting Jerry via Zoom, and one mother stopped the whole thing by claiming that it was critical race theory.
Wow. New Kid was widely acclaimed. It won a ton of awards. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller, translated into a dozen languages. New Kid is a semi-autobiographical graphic novel about a boy, Jordan, who wants to be an artist and go to art school. But his parents put him in a fancy private school. Jordan is one of only a few Black kids. A lot of the kids are wealthy, the campus is vast, and you watch Jordan, this funny, earnest kid, navigate a new environment. There's culture shock, there's new friendships. It's part fish out of water story, and part just kid in middle school figuring out crushes in the cafeteria, and things like should he do sports or the musical. When he published New Kid in 2019, Jerry had been writing comics for decades. This was the book he'd always wanted to write, the book he wished he'd had as a kid, with a Black character who seemed just regular. Jerry says he remembers going to the library as a kid, and it was always the general books and the Black books.
It was gangs or slavery or civil rights or police brutality. And I'm like, can I just see a kid who the biggest problem of the day is whether he wants to play Xbox or PlayStation? And that's why I do what I do. I make those books that I wish I had.
That's the thing about New Kid being banned. So many of the other Black authors with banned books are writing explicitly about racism or history. Books about how slavery has shaped America, police brutality, how to be an anti-racist. But New Kid, this is not a history book. It's not about police violence or slavery or civil rights. It's a story about finding your place in middle school. There are racial slights in a sort of daily way. White classmates and teachers make assumptions about where Jordan's from, that he's a great athlete. They say ignorant things, try to touch a Black friend's hair. Administrators continue to call a long-standing Black teacher Coach, even though he's never coached anything. Jordan often finds his stuff funny. He laughs about it with another Black classmate. Sometimes he finds it confusing or annoying, but it's not tragic. These are just things that happen on the way, alongside lots of other experiences with his white classmates and teachers. When I talked to Jerry, I didn't know the specifics of the objections in Texas.
The complaint that I saw was that I'm teaching kids critical race theory.
But I did talk to the mom who complained about Jerry Kraft's books. Her name is Bonnie Anderson. She has 3 kids in the schools. She's very involved in local school politics.
I don't know if have you read these books?
Yeah, my kids read them.
So the first thing that I noticed is all of the microaggressions that the author is depicting.
Microaggressions, meaning the everyday, thoughtless stuff white people in the book say around Black kids.
Yeah, that white.
Bonnie worried how reading those depictions might make white kids feel. Bonnie was very public. She cared enough about this to create a petition demanding the district cancel Jerry Kraft's event. It got 400 signatures. After Bonnie's petition and the complaint about New Kid including vulgarity, the district responded, launched an investigation, and said it was using the new Texas law to evaluate the book. It also pulled Jerry's books from the library and called off his author visit. In Pennsylvania, a group of parents got the school board to ban a list of diverse books, including a children's book about Rosa Parks. They worried the books could be used to make white children feel guilty. A group of white moms in Tennessee have demanded a book about Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington be removed from the curriculum. They also objected to a chapter book called The Story of Ruby Bridges because it makes it seem like white people are bad. The investigation into New Kid lasted 10 days, at which point the district announced their findings. No inappropriate material. Children would be allowed to read this book in Katy, Texas, and Jerry's event with the kids was rescheduled. It went fine. Kids asked the same questions they always do. What inspired you? Is there going to be a movie? But that same day, the Katy School Board had a meeting. Parents showed up to complain that the event was allowed to go forward, that critical race theory was infiltrating the schools, and they demanded a full audit of the whole library, which just recently they won. There was one mom who got up to defend New Kid and to say what the book means to her family. I've never spoken before, so this is about the Jerry Craft book. Sure you all know about that. Her name is Courtney. She's a Black woman standing before a line of board members who all appear to be white. Here's what she had to say. Even though the books will be placed on shelves again, I am concerned to what led to them being removed. Can you count on your hand and tell me how many people of color you've ever had at your home? If you're having trouble or just can't remember a day or time, please tell me. What do you possibly know about what's wrong with a book you've never lived? Have you ever went to work for 2 years and have someone call you Brittany every morning? I have, because my name is Courtney. You know the correlation if you've read the book, New Kid by Jerry Craft. Did you read it? Have you ever served this great country in the Washington, D.C. inauguration of 2000, Korea 2001, Iraq 2003, Afghanistan 2015, Fort Hood 2016, only to have your 15-year-old twin son call you in the middle of a workday saying he doesn't like his Cato High School and learn that the doctor visits of anxiety and stomach pains for the last 12 months were only due to a white teen calling your son the N-word for the last year of 2018? Well, I have. If you read the book, you'd understand the correlation once again of the Oreo joke. How dare you 444 signatures remove what little representation my culture has to show its reality in literature form on the modern day shelves? I don't applaud you for placing the books back on the shelves. My only hope is that you not allow the unknown and false narratives to sway your judgment on needed representation of us all. Representation does matter. Please don't thank me for my service. I do it because I love it. Many friends and battles have died and bled for it. As for Katy ISD, do what you should and need to do to uphold the standards of fairness, justice, and representation for this school district so I can thank you for yours. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Emily Lewis. You'll see you have right.
In so many corners of the country right now, parents, usually white parents, are showing up to meetings just like this to express their fear, to say they don't want their children harmed or feeling uncomfortable. Courtney is talking about harm that is already happening. And Jerry Craft is already uncomfortable. He wrote a whole book about feeling uncomfortable. He told me, you just learn to deal with it.
Is this the new 2021 version of book burning and burning the author at the stake for the school district kicking him to the curb?
It is, and it's so sad because this really isn't warranted. It's just another way for them to try and bring critical race theory into the discussion. Jerry is a phenomenal author. He has middle school fans all across the world. And the bad part about this story is that he's writing stories that really happened to his own son. And so his own son had issues at new schools, and that's what he's writing. And Katy ISD parents are taking that and just running with it to bolster their claims of critical race theory.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Culture. I am one of your hosts tonight, Quisha King. And if you've been watching this show, y'all know how I feel about the burning, this quote, book banning and burning books and getting rid of books and censorship, when that's just not the case. I'm sure everybody is all fired up, just as I am, with watching this montage. Chad just has a way of pressing them buttons, getting us to think, and it drives me nuts. I have a lot to say about this topic, but to answer the question, this Marxist, is this a Marxist ploy? Yes, it is a Marxist ploy. And what is behind these claims of book bans? Why do you think that they want to go straight to, oh, it's banning books? That's what it is, instead of being just like, yeah, this is what we want. This is what we want. This is what we think is right. Instead of just coming right out the gate and saying, yo, why lie? Why you got to lie, Craig? You ain't got to lie to kick it. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I have some other thoughts on this, but I'm going to bring, we have a guest co-host tonight. So Chad is traveling again. Y'all are going to love her. Make sure. So another thing, it's 2 women tonight. All right. I'm not thugging it out by myself. Okay. So I'm going to bring up Miss Gothics. Y'all know her from Gothics TV. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello. Excited to be here. That video pissed me off. So I can't wait to talk about it.
It's Chad. It gets your blood boiling every Sunday. So what are your thoughts though about the montage?
Oh my goodness. It's as you said, they stick to these like catchphrases. They're burning the books, because they don't want to articulate why they think they deserve to have perversion in school. That's really what it comes down to. Because if you were to ask these people, what about these books do you actually like? They just hide it behind these keywords of just like diversity, inclusion. No, it's perversion.
Like,
right.
They want to be seen.
Right.
What's a little anal sex for kids? I mean, they just want to be seen, a little incest. Ain't nothing wrong with that. I hope that doesn't get us banned on YouTube. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up. I think we need a little laughter to cut through this tension a little bit. So we're gonna bring up Mr. Blanche Robinson. Hello, Blanche. How are you? Let me get it. You muted.
What's up, y'all? How you doing?
Good.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Thoughts on the montage?
I mean, it's utter foolishness. It's just funny how you see the truth when you see Joy Reid on TV, and she didn't want to answer the lady's question, and she kept dancing around what the book was actually about. You see that she would answer the woman, then she tried to say, "Well, I'm running the show, I'm the host, just trying to divert all this attention because, again, like Gothic said, they don't want to come out and just say we want to promote perversion in school. And to be honest with you, the amount of Black children that can't read and write on grade level, they can't read the books anyway. So what do y'all actually have the books for if they can't even read them? Again, you put these pictures in the book so you can have a visualization. I got a book right here that I bought. It's Perfectly Normal. This book's out of control. It's just all kind of sexual acts in the book. People, everything from masturbation, everything's in the book, and they got pictures and everything. So again, they want to corrupt the children, but they just hide it behind. Notice they kept saying racist. No, they kept saying mostly white parents. Mostly white. They kept saying mostly white to give the illusion that a lot of parents have a problem with these books. Most parents just don't even know. Like, most parents don't know what the children are doing in school, so they have no idea what these books are. So, it's easy to say the books are good and the parents don't know versus actually getting up there and showing them page by page what they're talking about in these books. So it's utter foolishness.
Do you even think, what, before I ask the question, let me bring up our friend, Mr. Teach'em Chuck, who is going to give us an intellectual overview of all this craziness to help us understand what the history behind all this Marxist book, all the things. What's your take, Chuck? How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I don't even know where to start.
That was a lot.
I really, I tuned it out after a while, especially when they got to NPR. How anybody can listen to NPR and not fall asleep, I don't know. They talk and it's very genteel, it's non-threatening, very soothing, monotone voice. Right? All the while they're plotting and openly talking about some of the most diabolical things you can ever imagine. But once it got to that part, I was really I was done. That lady's talking about what was she saying about the United States and it's dead. The whole American dream, it's gone. It's dead. And I just wrote down here in my notes as I was listening. I just said, well, who killed it, right?
Right.
I mean, who killed it? And then she's talking all this stuff about those who, and it's funny because the left, I forgot who put it this way. It might have been my buddy. I say my buddy as if I know him. I don't know him. But Constantine Kessin over at Trigonometry, he said, I believe it. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He said that the left hates America for its ideals, but the right, or some of us on the so-called right, hate America for failing to live up to its ideals. This is why you have certain individuals such as Tucker Carlson attacking Winston Churchill. And mind you, I'm speaking for myself, not anyone else on the panel, because I know, a lot of people still like folks like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. You see the book burning there, the Nazis, images and footage of them burning books. I hate to break it to you, Miss Owens, but yeah, that's not a good thing. This Hitler guy, yeah, he wasn't, that was wrong. He should not have been doing that. I don't know when she woke up on the wrong side of the bed, bumped her head. I'm not sure. But anyway, they're talking about, they mention people like Ernest Hemingway and Helen Keller, Jack London. Ernest Hemingway was I don't know if he was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party proper, but he was a communist propagandist, Ernest Hemingway, but he was a great novelist nonetheless. Helen Keller, she was another leftist, as was Jack London. Jack London was heavily influenced by the literature of Karl Marx and Charles Darwin and Friedrich Nietzsche. This is Jack London, but nevertheless, he was a phenomenal writer and a phenomenal novelist. But, of course, his books should not have been burned, and Ernest Hemingway's books should not have been burned, or Karl Marx's books should not have been burned, especially considering the fact that Nazism or National Socialism or fascism and communism both have the same ideological root, which is, of course, the romantic writings of 18th century philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. This conversation isn't necessarily about the singular origins of both fascism and communism, but it's worth mentioning the fact that communism and fascism at a point diverged into two separate directions, perhaps for different divergent paths because of separate individuals with different political aspirations and motivations. But nevertheless, both fascism and communism are both quintessentially Hegelian. But perhaps that's not really on topic with the show. But when they're talking about, this whole thing in the title of the show, when Chad talks about, is book burning or book banning or whatever a form of gaslighting? Well, of course it is. And I want to bring up perhaps not now, because it'll require some more exposition. But you have two particular essays written by the so-called father or founder of the New Left, or at least he was, heavily involved in the creation of the New Left, at least from a philosophical standpoint, and that of course being Herbert Marcuse, and his two essays, one titled Repressive Tolerance, which was published in 1969, and he also has another one he wrote in 1972 titled Revolution and Revolt, where just briefly to talk about revolution and revolt, he talks about this bridging, the bridging of the gap between what he refers to as the radical intelligentsia and the quote ghetto population. And that's something that we can get into later. But lastly, I'd just like to say, what's so funny to me, and you kind of saw this with Joy Reid in the exchange that she had with that young mom, or with that mom of Moms for Liberty. It reminds me, remember when Justice Potter Stewart back in 1964, in the famous case, I think it was Jacob Ellis v. Ohio, I think it was, and he was making reference to what's known to history as the Roth test, right? Now, I think that was Roth v. United States from back in 1957, which established the standard of what we refer to as, obscenity, right? When it comes to what should be allowed in public and so on and so forth. And when commenting on what meets the marker of obscenity, i.e. pornography, remember, hence we get the famous quote from Justice Stewart that you know it when you see it, right? You know it when you see it. Notice, why is it that every time one of these parents gets in front of one of these school board meetings and actually takes the book in the library at their children's school and begins to read the material out loud, they're always cut off? The mic is cut. They're shot down. They're not allowed to speak. Joy Reid wouldn't dare take a book and read verbatim from the contents within that book on her show. She wouldn't do it because she knows how it sounds when it's said out loud, because it's the feelings that it elicits within an individual when they hear such things, because they know obscenity when they hear it, right? There are certain things, and I hate to get too philosophic too quickly, but there's certain things that are just so, it is so truthful beyond articulation that it doesn't need to be explained. You just know it, right? This is why when Matt Walsh asked the question in his documentary film, "What is a woman?" it sort of catches people off guard. Even people on the so-called right, it sort of catches them off guard because they ask themselves, why do I have to explain this, right? Because within the essence, within the form, within the physical form, right, is the essence of this thing that kind of goes beyond the veil of the material world. It just is what it is. And the bigger question becomes, what becomes of us as human beings when we lose that ability? When we lose that ability to have that which is unseen kind of reflect in the culture and all that which is around us, right? And we create this inversion where we become the center of all that is. And so we're simply talking about ourselves instead of giving reference to the author and the architect of nature. So what becomes of us when we lose the ability to articulate that? Or what becomes of us when we pretend as though we no longer know what that is? We no longer know what that thing is. We no longer know what proper behavior is. Because deep down inside, I think, Quisha, we still know. This is why they don't want you to read it out loud, because they know. They just know. And so, anyway, I'll stop.
God's word, his word is written on our hearts. You know that this is a lie.
They just know.
That's why you got to, I've never understood this. Now they tell you to be more like yourself, you got to be somebody else. Now, what kind of foolishness? It's like the amount of backflips you got to do to try to make this thing be right. To be more of yourself, you got to actually be somebody else. It's crazy. I want to ask Gothics this question. So the woman with the, I don't know her name, but she had the blonde hair, was sitting there saying, "Oh, America's so crazy." She basically said that for sex and, you know, gay people and all of these things are in society, you know, so we have to tell kids about these, you know, all types of topics. We have to give this information to kids because it exists in the world. My thing has always been that was kind of that's part of the reason why we're here, to help guide them. So when they go off into certain things that aren't for them or aren't right to do, we bring them back. We don't let them keep going down that road just because it exists. That's just my take. What is your take when you hear somebody say, well, the kids are going to see it anyway, so we might as well show it to them?
You could literally use that argument for anything. Just because things are prevalent in society doesn't mean you need to teach a child about it. If they're going to learn about it, they can learn about it on their own. But the thing is like, this is what happens when society moves so far away from God's standard, because as Chuck was saying, and you even said this too, it's like we have the law written on our heart. We don't have to explain to people what is natural law because that's self-evident. Like, we understand that heterosexuality is the standard and anything outside of that is abnormal. I know that hurts some people's feelings, but should we really be teaching kids about things that are abnormal in the world? Yes, these things exist, but I think it almost becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy where we put things in a child's face, and since they're so young and they're like sponges, you know, I find it hard to believe that people are questioning why there's been an increase in young LGBT people or kids, because we're teaching these kids about these things when they're so impressionable to begin with, and I don't think we should.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry.
Well,
I have my finger on the button.
you-
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna jump in because it looked like Blanche was silent. It was just chilling, so I'm gonna just jump in here. It's funny because they openly admit, they openly tell you that, I mean, they have this agenda. I mean, it's called a critical pedagogy for a reason. By the early 1990s, they came up with this whole idea of what they called a queer pedagogy. And I forgot that there's an essay that was written. It's called Queering, and I think it's called Queering in Education. I can't remember who the author was, but I think this was published back in 1993. Even someone say like a not Judith Butler. I'm thinking about the other woman. As a matter of fact, I covered her in my homosexuality and communism video on my YouTube channel, who wrote an essay back in 1984. It'll come to me after I'm done talking, I'm sure, where she talks about all of these ideas about society and how we have marginalized the quote unquote pervert, right? And how do we bring the pervert who is on the margin of society to bring him back to the center? Because ultimately what you're talking about when you're talking about this queer ideology, you see, queer isn't even something that those who traffic in this theory even know how to define themselves. They openly tell you, because what is key to the queer ideology, or the core of the queer ideology, is this perception that it doesn't exist, because once you have objectified what that thing is, the quote unquote queer ideology, then you have essentially kind of created a framework that can then be, in their own words, so sort of normalized. And so anything that exists outside the norm is what's defined as queer. And so this is how we must continue to discover more and more abhorrent and objectionable behavior, so that we can continuously seek out new margins that we can then refocus and then start the process all over again until we reach this until we've reached the end of history, as Marx talked about. So in essence, to go back to Marcuse, this whole issue of tolerance,
widening the margin.
You have to widen the margins, because to quote David Halpern, I think this is a quote from David Halpern's work when he did he wrote a book on the French postmodernist Michel Foucault, who had a lot of his methodological ideas applied to the new kind of neo-Marxist paradigm that propped up after the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. David Halpern defined it as the queer. Queer is an identity without an essence. So essentially, it's like not a thing. It's like this kind of vague, anything that is outside of what is defined as normal. So this is why it went from, say, for example, it went from heterosexuality or homosexuality, right? That's like, the homosexuality, this is something that even, Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in 1963, said in a 1972 speech that perhaps the homosexual is the most revolutionary of us all, right? Well, this particular idea, when you're talking about queers, would surpass Huey P. Newton's idea, because once the homosexual becomes normalized, once he becomes tolerated, he becomes what they refer to as a straight homosexual, a homosexual that has been, normalized by this kind of heteronormative hegemonic structure that has taken someone with same-sex attraction and kind of coax them into living a more socially acceptable lifestyle. So for example, if I were to say, well, I'm gay, I'm attracted to men, I want to live the quintessential American lifestyle. I want to marry a man and go on and settle down and do no. Because you're living a life that's just like heterosexuals. You're just attracted to someone of the same sex. So it's not radical enough. It's not revolutionary enough, because you are now within a more acceptable boundary, or a more acceptable framework. of everyday society. And so we have to, once again, search for new margins. And the last thing I'll say is, when I was going to bring up Marcuse and his belief in tolerance, or how he sort of thought about the term, and it wasn't so much that we must tolerate one another, tolerate people with different beliefs and so on, the kind of this idea that sort of underlays, right, classical liberalism, right, the idea of the Enlightenment and the secular law, right? No, toleration is not a means to allow for the continued functioning of a healthy and orderly society. Toleration or tolerance should be the end result, because when you have what he refers to as bipartisan, or what he may have called it nonpartisan tolerance, meaning tolerance for things that you like, toleration for things that you don't like, you allow for the perpetuation of the status quo, which is inherently intolerant of the marginalized and the oppressed and the so on and so forth. And so we haven't reached a point of real tolerance until we can exercise repressive tolerance, which is intolerant of the beliefs that don't allow for true tolerance. I know that sounds like a bunch of but that's literally, how these intellectuals, how they talk, right? And you got to read it slowly to kind of get to. So when you're talking about gaslighting, that's exactly what it is, because the left, and mind you, Hitlerism, Nazism, fascism, this is a political movement of the left, not of the right. Again, not the topic, not the discussion, not the theme of the Tonight Show. I get it, right? But they believe that in order to spread tolerance, you must be intolerant to beliefs that don't allow for tolerance, which is certain ideas, homosexual, marriage between a man and a woman. Let's say, we can start there, but you all know what I'm talking about, right? Some of the more common conventions that we think, okay, well, this is the standard, right? This is what we do. This is how you should be in the world, right? We must be intolerant of that, right? It's sort of like what Ibram X. Kendi says, that talks about anti-racism, right? You must be a racist in order to promote anti-racism, right? Which is an idea he got from Jean-Paul Sartre. You must be intolerant until there can be tolerance.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's my mic. I think my computer is having some issues. But that is so. I am amazed. And Blanche, if you want to jump in here, if you had something to say, did you have something to add on?
Oh no, go ahead. I'll just jump in on the next one.
Okay. It's amazing how complicated these things are, because you got to bend yourselves in all these different ways to try to make these new ideas, these enlightened ideas, be true. And I mean, it's funny that people who can't seem to understand basic science, they can't understand that, but they can understand all this, deep philosophy and, all, I don't know. It's just weird to me. Like, I think ultimately this whole thing, you probably know what I'm going to say. I think it's just about a communist takeover. I don't think that these people really believe deeply any of this stuff. Like, I think they just want the revolution. Like, that's the glasses that they see through, in my opinion. They just want the revolution. They'll say and do whatever it takes. We'll come and try to pull from some of the craziest things ever that have been written in history, so it can, if it makes our way look and sound better, cool, I'm with it. Like, I don't think that they care anything about any of the things that they say that they care about. I don't know. I just don't believe them. They're like the devil. There's no truth in them. It's like these people, there's no truth in these people. Let me see. I want to play. Let me see. I'm going to play this clip here and we can get reaction.
Why are conservatives so obsessed with banning books? We've already seen that children are the ones who lose the most when adults fight over what books are appropriate for them. They lose out when it comes to their freedom of speech and expression. They lose out on the fundamental human development that comes when you're exposed to new and different ideas. And they lose out on the power of representation and seeing someone who looks like you reflected in your books and media. And they lose out because instead of focusing on their education, their educators have to focus on a small faction of vocal, angry parents who are making their lives hell, and now potentially maybe going to literal prison. This is not about the children. This is about power and control at the expense of the children. This is about imposing a specific worldview that conservatives fear is being lost. Because it is. We've moved beyond the idea that America is a perfect nation, land of the free, home of the brave. We all know the American dream is dead. And thank God. Now, instead of parading around pretending we live in some capitalist utopia, we can actually roll up our sleeves and have difficult conversations, including with our children, about what the world actually looks like for them. And that world includes non-binary kids, and lesbian moms, and sex, and violence, and racism, and yes, even gay penguins.
So I wanted to play that because when people say that, you know, we have to show this stuff because representation is important. I was a few days ago, I was thinking about this whole representation thing. And I think the Holy Spirit gave me this. The representation, the only representation that you need is you being made in the image of God. Like when you see another person that is made in the image of God doing something positive, you know, doing something that uplifts God's word, that is or his way of doing life. That is the only representation that you need. It doesn't matter the color of the person. It doesn't matter their sex. It matters that they are made in the image of God and they are doing a thing that is right and good and beautiful and true. Like all of this other stuff means nothing. You don't need to, I need to see a Black person do it before I can say I'm represented. You know what I mean? Like, no, you don't. Like, you really don't. Like, oh, I need to see somebody. I mean, this would not be, this would be applicable to Christians, but you know, I need to see somebody gay do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, that's weird. That is not the only representation you need to see is to see somebody, you know, actually do. It doesn't matter all of these other characteristics. You just need to see somebody that is doing the thing. I'm not talking about like, you know, the gay stuff. I mean, just Black people say this a lot. Mm-hmm. You know, I need to see somebody Black doing it before I can believe it to be true. It's like, I don't think so.
Well, if that was really the case, then the representation they need is the parents. Why aren't the parents doing it? You know, and obviously we don't all have perfect parents. So yeah, to your point, looking at people through the lens of like a biblical worldview, seeing people made in the image of God and trying to be more Christ-like, that's really your representation. Otherwise, it seems to me, and this woman sort of alluded to it, where she says people are mad that they're trying to do away with a specific worldview. And so she has a worldview just like we have our own worldview. And our worldview is that we are made in God's image and he's the authoritative, like that's who we get our authority from. That's our standard, you know. And when people don't have that identity in Christ, they will come up with their own identity through like a racial lens or their sexuality. And that's when things really fall apart, because the thing is what she was saying about, you are hurting a child's ability to learn about the world and things like that. No, I want people to know about the real world. I mean, you can do that by opening up the Bible. Like, we can learn about sin. We can learn about evil and good and all that stuff. I don't need to open up a book on queer theory and things like that. And, something that I have come to, reconsider over the years of me like researching and really asking about these questions when it comes to education, there really isn't any neutral ground when it comes to public education. Like someone's worldview is going to be imposed on that child. Yes. And if you're going to send your child to a school for 8 hours a day, you should have some say on what type of worldview that child is going to be exposed to. And and they're doing the same exact thing. So I find it interesting that when a Christian is trying to do it, oh, you're trying to brainwash the kids. I'm sorry, what are you doing? What's that?
Yeah. And they can't seem to make that connection again, because they don't to me, in my opinion, I don't think they really even believe this stuff. Like, they know good and doggone well that they are pushing an agenda. They know it. They want it. They literally sat and devised the plan. They came up with this plan on how we can indoctrinate the kids. You know what I mean? And so why is that a problem? You got your indoctrination. I got mine. I told my kids, yeah, I am indoctrinating you. Yes, I am. I'm supposed to.
And that's not to say, by the way, that people shouldn't learn how to think. I think that's important. Like, I would hate for someone to adopt a worldview without thinking critically about that worldview. You know what I mean? But when you're raising a child, they don't know anything. So yeah, you are teaching them what to think, and then hopefully you'll teach them how to think. So then they'll be able to maintain that worldview when they go out into the real world.
For sure. And just one more thing before we move on to another person, but a lot of conservatives say that a lot. We want to teach you how to think, not what to think. I definitely want to teach my children what to think, because you don't know anything. Have you ever talked to a child? They don't know what to think.
Right.
So it is important that we teach them what to think, and like you said, Gothics, how to think. Blanche, what you got?
I think that they know exactly what they're doing, and like Chuck was talking about, they have to get rid of what is normal. Even most homosexuals, most LGBTQs, they kind of live a normal life that's based on heterosexual life. So it's kind of still normal. It's still not out of the box. You got a couple that gets together, they live together, they even want to adopt children, have pets. They still live the quote unquote American dream, just as the LGBTQ members, even to the point where the man might become trans, or the man becomes a woman becomes a man, and they still have the same kind of relationship, which is quote unquote a heterosexual relationship. I think that heterosexual actually just represents God, because that's what God intended, for us to be fruitful and multiply. So really it's attack on God's original designs. So anything that's close to what God did, they have to get rid of it. That's why Chuck was talking about, they have to make the abnormal normal. You got to make the extreme of everything normal, to now when you look back on to see, okay, what did God create? Now you just see a freak show, and they often say that, we were born in the wrong body, God doesn't make mistakes, but God made me this way. It has to be right because I feel this. Just all this rhetoric they use. At the end of the day, what they're really saying is that we have to go against what God has ordained. And the problem is that, again, most parents don't know what the children are learning in school. They just don't know. They're assuming it's math and science and reading and all that, but it's now it's indoctrination. It's worse. And so now they're talking about that people want to brainwash these children, but in actuality, they're trying to make the public school area a neutral ground just to learn the basics. If your child wants to know about trans and LGBTQs, you can buy them books. They can go to a library, they can start a book, anything. But we're talking about school, like you all mentioned, the children don't know. So if you're teaching a child, and again, these children don't know anything anyway academically, but if you're force feeding all this stuff in the child, like this one teacher in California had the kids doing Pledge of Allegiance to the gay flag, the pride flag.
Oh, right.
I'm like, what are we doing? Like, this is like, I don't know. So anyway, they're not naive though. They have to corrupt the minds of these children to get this goal accomplished. So then 20 years from now, it'd be on autopilot. It'd be just straight chaos everywhere.
Chuck?
It's man, I have so many thoughts, man, running through my mind. It's hard, man. I don't even really know where to begin, man. Listening to Gothics and you, Quisha, the two of you, I mean, just bringing up, I think like just God and Christianity, and this goes all the way back. I mean, this is going back to the Hellenic period, right, of objective truth and what is considered truth, or how do we define reality, and kind of looking at the contrast between, because at the end of the day, I mean, Marxism, right? I mean, it is a faith, right? It is a secular faith. And it's funny because it is in a weird way, Marxism is sort of like a heresy of another heresy, right? When you look at the root of the modern left, I mentioned Hegel earlier. He's a huge figure in the annals of the modern left and all its literature and all its theories. And Hegel is commonly referred to as a theologian, but when you understand Hegel, you see him more so for what he is, which was actually a theosophist. He was heavily influenced. There was another German philosopher that predates Hegel by the name of Jakob Boehme, and Jakob Boehme was a spiritualist. I mean, he was an occultist, to cut to the chase. And Hegel was very impressed by Boehme, and so were a lot of other Germans who would come after Boehme's death. But Hegel took this idea that God could be expressed by man, or what he referred to as the absolute or the ideal, which was in Hegel's philosophy was sort of like God, and the epitome of that ideal or the absolute ideal can be found at the point of the state through this ongoing. It's not linear, of course, because progression. I mean, they would just take this whole idea that progression occurs linearly in a linear fashion. Of course, they would adopt this whole dialectical model. But the absolute would be expressed at the point of the state, and this absolute or this absolute ideal is what Hegel would refer to as God. And so, you had three. You had the citizenry and nature, and then the state, and that took on a whole kind of triune character, sort of like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. In Orthodox Christianity, again, Hegel would take this kind of this spiritual, these classical or traditional Christian notions of salvation and redemption, and he would take it and kind of superimpose it onto society to figure out how could we essentially use these ideas, use this framework to bring about some absolute form of being in the world. And which, Hegel, again, was a theosophist, or some, again, refer to him as a theologian, albeit he was a very heretical theologian. But Marx would take the ideas of Hegel and turn them on its ear, considering the fact that Marx didn't believe that there was a God, that there was no a way, in fact, to reach the ideal other than this ongoing process of what he refers to as negation. Again, I'm just like, it's so hard to really, because I don't want to, because I'm gonna go into too much. But Marx had this idea that there is no way for us to know what the absolute ideal is. The only thing we can hope to do as man, since there is no God, is to look at the world around us and see what should not be there. And so we criticize until we strip away society to the point where there is nothing left, essentially reverting back to some form of primitive communism where man is all that is, where we get back to the beginning before the fall, which was in his mind the advent of private property, which led to the phenomenon of alienation. Right? Man became alienated from the fact that he was, in fact, God, and that this God was this kind of Frankenstein monster of his own creation. Well, when you look at the queer ideology, and the reason why I kind of gave that brief background into the foundational theories of the left is because leftists believe that by opening children up to this sort of queer identity, they're taking them into a state where they can actually be their true selves. because the body, and you hear when they talk about this, they talk about, the body or black bodies and this, that, and the third, because the true person is at the point of the soul. The body is the thing to which you perform with, but the true self is beyond the veil of matter, which is the illusion, and actually lies at the point of the soul. So there was a famous French philosopher by the name of Simone de Beauvoir, who came up with this idea essentially that gender is what you perform with, but we don't know what you actually are. We can only assume that you're a male or female based upon how you perform in your social roles. And so to bring yourself into this kind of queer identity where you could be male or female, or maybe not, and maybe this and maybe that, that is sort of like an example of this kind of consciousness raising that takes you beyond that and takes you into your true self, where you can actually find some sense of liberation or redemption for oneself. And so essentially, and Quisha, you know this, you've used this term, and you and I have talked about this before. What we have now is just this modern day manifestation of like this centuries old Gnostic cult that is seeking for some kind of awakened truth to the actual nature, the actual being of man himself. And so, and like we said, and like Blanchard alluded to as well, like they know precisely what they're doing because they teach and talk amongst each other about how to deal with parents, for example, when they are approached with objections from parents for teaching the things that they teach. There's one woman named Jill Herman Milrath wrote an essay titled Getting Over Parental Consent, and how to push back against parents who push back against you. So they know exactly what they're doing.
For sure. So with the majority of what you said about the spiritual component, the soul, and like this, your body is just performing this act, but your soul is, it's like on one hand, they want to take away the essence of who you really are, which would be tied into your soul and your spirit. It's like on one hand, and this is, the devil always does this, takes God's design, his stuff, and perverts it in to something else, to create something in his own image. And it's always, it's something that can never stand. It can't ever, there's no truth in it. So it can't, it's not solid. It's like, shaky foundation. But that is, part of that is true. Like, yes, we are a soul and a spirit in a body. Like, yes, that is true. If our soul and our spirit was taken out of our body would not have any life. So like part of that is true, and this is the same thing like from the garden. Part of what the serpent was saying to Eve kind of was true, it was a tiny bit of truth, but it was a lie at the end, it was a lie. So Satan always takes, bits and pieces to try to remake God's stuff in his own image, which always leaves you with nothing. It's a mirage. It's not even really there, which is essentially why you can't, I don't even like to use the word trans because it's not real. Like that does not exist. You cannot transition a person into another gender. It is impossible. You cannot do it. I don't want to even play these games with these people. Like, this is not real.
Navigating Parental Consent was the name of the book by Dr. Jill Herman Milrath. You'll see it if you look it up. Navigating Parental Consent.
Is that new or is that old?
It's fairly new. It's not like decades old. It's fairly new.
Let me play this clip. Let me show you what happens when kids get into this ideology.
Should parents have a say?
There should be facilitation of collaboration between students.
Should parents have a say?
Parents should be working with students and educators to be making decisions.
That's Cameron Samuels, a KDISD graduate, testifying before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee this month, addressing the growing number of book bans in a now viral clip.
I stood up for my freedoms, but my school district removed age-relevant books at record pace.
Why is this so important to you? I felt obligated to call to light the censorship because it was harming me and harming many of my peers.
Now, as the executive director, Samuel says the group, which hasn't even been around a year, won't stop fighting for what they believe in.
We aren't advocating for inappropriate materials in elementary school libraries like these senators were telling us. But what we are advocating for is that they stop fear-mongering, stoking fear on books.
Samuels, along with Hayden Cohen and Zara Bakrin, took the trip to D.C., also as an opportunity to speak with lawmakers about other issues impacting students.
So that young man has been, you were looking at someone who is thoroughly, fully brainwashed. You know, what is he, like all of 15, 16 years old? And he's already got an organization. I mean, all of these things are feeding a part of him, you know, that they have thoroughly brainwashed into believing that, you know, his lifestyle and all of this stuff is true. And I'm sure he's full on with the trans. And I mean, there is no boundary with this young man. He is, they have done a good job in brainwashing this young man. So this is the outcome. This kid, you couldn't tell this young man that, you know, son, the things that you're advocating for, you talking about, you know, the parents should work in community with the kids and all this. You're not even old enough to make those kind of decisions, and you're trying to tell parents, you know, how they should be acting and not acting with their own children. You know, it's the ego of it, the arrogance of it. You know, it's like, I mean, he's like 15 or 16 years old, and he's speaking with all this confidence as if he knows, you know, he has lived, honey. He knows what he's talking about. It's just, it's sad, you know, that somebody like him, it takes a revelation of the Lord, you know, for him to come out of that, you know, for him to be saved.
And nobody, you know, when you as an educator, you know, you're already providing gullible children with conclusions on very controversial issues. You're no longer an educator. Right. You know, when you go into as a, you know, your professor, your teacher, you know, they used to call this back in the day. They called it the speculative path or the speculative life. And you know, back in the day, and I'm talking back in the day, right? It's sort of like, I don't know if there was an actual ritual or ceremony, you said a pledge or took some kind of vow, but you made it up in your mind that by doing so, you know, the honorable thing to do as a companion to that, I guess, dedication to knowledge seeking, you stayed out of the realm of politics, right? That was the job, that was the duty of the one who chose the speculative path, is not to dibble and dabble in politics, because that was seen as like this dirty thing, right? For someone who's actually seeking knowledge and seeking true wisdom. That's not something that you did. Now, you know, you're talking 1960s, 1970s, you know, I briefly hinted at how much, you know, Marcuse kind of changed the trajectory of American education. And he wasn't the only one. There are a lot of figures involved. We don't even have time to go down the laundry list. But that's a huge problem going on too, as far as our educational system is concerned. You know, this is cult indoctrination, right? And again, they know very well what they're doing. That's the old, as they call it, the old Mott and Bailey strategy, right? To make you think, oh, you know, we're just trying to preach, you know, tolerance and more acceptance and this and that. But notice how when you cobble together these disparate groups of disenfranchised people, the identity that they have as it pertains to whatever class, I guess, they either see themselves as being members of, or perhaps some kind of higher up or a radical intelligentsia, to quote Marcuse, kind of puts them in this class. that in and of itself, because you're supposed to have class consciousness and the way you see the world as an individual is predicated upon the group that you belong to, that in and of itself is the impetus for your revolutionary outlook. And so the whole purpose and the whole point of this representation, right, is to create this cadre of left-wing revolutionaries for the purpose of getting rid of the four O's, right? We all familiar with the four O's that Mao talked about, right? Ideas, culture, customs, and habits. This is the exact same thing that the lady said in that clip, was talking about, you know, America's gone, it's dead. And wow, I mean, aren't we glad? Well, we're glad it is, right? And then you have these, you know, parents who, you know, a lot of them send their children to public schools and say, why are our taxpayer, why is our money, our property taxes going towards subsidizing the overthrow of the very country, the very civilization that we live in, right? It just doesn't make, it just doesn't make any sense. All right.
At Gothics, I never understood the idea of tearing down something that you're standing in. Like, you're in the United States, you're standing here, and they're like, let's bring it all down. It's like, girl, you know you in the house, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of, well, first of all, I think most people don't think about what they actually are espousing. They sort of just follow the herd. They get, you know, because everyone appeals to some authority. Mine is God, and theirs is whoever is in a position of expertise, you know, the scientists, psychologists, whatever. And so they just take their word for it. They don't think about what it is they're promoting. And I also think that there's a little bit of cowardice that goes along with it. Like we saw it during like the BLM stuff that was happening, where you can clearly see that something is wrong with that entire movement, but people were still on board with it because I think there was a level of fear. You didn't want to be the person that wasn't supporting something so destructive because you must hate Black people. You know, you're tap dancing for the white supremacists or something like that. Right. So I think it's the same thing where, you know, like the clip with Joy Reid, where she didn't want to actually answer the direct question about what does a sex toy have to do? Well, why are we teaching kids about this? You know, you can't defend those things. And if you actually were to be honest about the things that are in the school, I think, you know, you'd get backlash from your own side. And I think most people just don't want to be ostracized. And I'm way past that. I don't care if I hurt anyone's feelings. You know, what's right and what's truth is, it is what it is.
So do you think that they would, if Joy Reid was to be like, yeah, it is about that, and so what you gonna do? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we said. Like, do you mm-hmm. think that she would, that her supporters would actually pull back? Do you think that people would actually be offended, you know, and be like, oh my God, I can't believe she's, or do you think that they would be like, yeah,
a part of me thinks that her supporters would pull back a little bit, because I think I think human beings in general, we have a tendency to follow the herd, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you see someone who is being honest, I think it would eventually go with like her fans or whatever, but not all of them. You know, I would have more respect if Joy Reid would said, yeah, I am teaching I do want kids to learn about perversion. Yes, mm-hmm. I am a pervert. Why not? You know, I'd be more, I would be more happy if you're just honest, be upfront, stop gaslighting, lying, because I can see right through you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be so curious to see what would happen, because I feel like we see the truth all the time and people are met with these things, but they still just buy it. Like, I don't see them backing down. Like, even like when I've had these conversations, not necessarily about like the trans and gay stuff, but like with all the Black stuff, with, you know, close family members. And I'm like, look, like, this is wrong. We like, here is history. This did not happen or whatever. And you're showing them the truth. And it's like,
it doesn't affect them.
It does not affect them.
Their life personally. And then the lies will be too inconvenient for them to just continue promoting.
This is why I said it's a cult, because I've never seen people be confronted with the truth and still act that way, and with such a strong conviction to it, like people in a cult. So that, I mean, I
But
wonder. Go ahead.
But it's not just they're saying that, like if Joy Reid comes out and says, you know, what she's actually promoting, it's what they're weighing it against. So it's not like she's just saying that you want to indoctrinate children. She's saying that white people don't like this. Racist white people don't like this. So this is what makes people buy into it, because they're thinking, oh, well, if Trump doesn't like it and the Republicans don't like it and the conservatives don't like it, then it must be something that's good. They don't even examine it after that point. And so they do a great job out of making you believe that the country is divided on the white folks over here want America to be this way, and then everybody else is sensible want America to be this way. But in actuality, if you just read this stuff out in a neutral setting, you just put on a loudspeaker and read it out, most parents would be appalled. But if you put it against something, if you say, okay, this is what mostly white parents don't like, this is what mostly conservatives don't like, this is what, that's how you can go on NPR and you can speak all monotone and calm, because you've already set the stage. You've already said for the first 10 minutes of the episode,
your audience.
Yeah, you've already said, you know, we're under attack. They're against democracy. They want to burn. And you set them up. So by the time you present something, the person is already psychologically, you know, their mind is already gone. So they're not just presenting it to us. They're presenting it to us as to say, and I always say this, if you want to get black folks to ride with something, just say that racist white folks don't like it. And black folks they're gonna ride with it. It's just that simple.
It's true.
So a lot of times we don't even critically analyze what's even being presented to us. We just assume, we base it on who likes it and who doesn't. That's why they always preface everything by saying Republicans want, Republicans don't want, conservatives want. They always set you up, and then when they present it to you, and it could be something crazy. It could be something like butt naked kindergartners, and they just be like, well, Republicans don't like it. Well, the kids should be able to express themselves. You know, they should be able to be free. I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, they kind of really do that. I mean, it's that, you know what, this is like a Babylon Bee headline. I mean, they literally have given books to kids. Y'all, I have seen, I'm talking about kink. They're like, yeah, they need to learn about They need to learn about this thing. Y'all, I don't know why I'm whispering, like, you know, my kids ain't in here, but I'm just saying, like, it is just the craziest thing. It might as well be, you know, butt naked little people like this running around. I mean, just might as well.
You know, because, you know, Quisha, like I mentioned, David Halperin, who defined queer as an identity without an essence. Of course, he wrote the book Saint Foucault, right, and about Michel Foucault and going over Michel Foucault's writings, right? Michel Foucault, I mean, I don't know if it matters much, but, you know, surprise to no one, he was, of course, a homosexual. I believe he died of HIV/AIDS. I think he died in sometime during the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. But Michel Foucault introduced a lot of ideas, as I mentioned earlier, that the left kind of globbed onto and kind of used it as a new method, if you will, of deconstructing, right? And Michel Foucault, his whole thing was about literature and sort of deconstructing the meaning of things and sort of deconstructing the meaning of words and you know, how we use language and all this other stuff, right? And so how do we define things, but more importantly and more specifically, how do we define what's true? How do we define what is truth? And considering the fact that there is not only is there no truth, but there is no good, bad, there's no right and wrong. It's only thought that makes it so, right? It's kind of Shakespearean in that way, right? And so what we believe to be right and wrong, true, false, of course, is simply an expression of power, right? And so when a person, we don't talk about how this power is acquired. We just all of a sudden insert ourselves into a situation that has already been established, right? We already have a status quo. We already have cultural expectations. We already have institutions that, we're talking law, whatever the case may be, that is there to sort of enforce rules and punish those who refuse to abide by these agreed upon rules, right? There's no exploration or explanation in terms of how we got there, and this is sort of quintessential leftism, right? They don't necessarily explain things. They just jump into something that already is and just begins to critique and criticize something that it doesn't seem as though they fully understand or have even attempted to understand in the first place. But anyway, you have this power structure, right? And the power structure determines what is, what isn't, what's right, and what's wrong, right, for its own benefit. And you have institutions, right, that Marx, I guess, would refer to as the infrastructure that kind of protects the kind of overarching, I think the superstructure is what he called it. Anyway. And so you have institutions, whether it be education, law, media, culture, religion. All of these institutions are responsible for cultural production, the kind of cultural production that gives legitimacy to the system such as it is, so that those who have power can continue to benefit from the status quo at the expense of those who don't necessarily have ownership or access to the certain kind of capital that would allow them to reap the benefits or to reap the spoils of belonging to this community, right? This first person plural, such as it is. And so when it comes to sexual identity and sexual behavior in a kind of Michel Foucault type world that we're living in today, right? Those who are sexually, have, weird sexual, and the person I was thinking, right, perversions, the person I was thinking of earlier who wrote the essay, that was put in 1984. This was Gail Rubin. She's the head of the anthropology department at the University of Michigan, wrote an essay in 1984 called Thinking Sex, right? And so everything is political. Even sex is political in what we deem to be proper sexual conduct. Sex, heterosexual sex between a man and a woman in a marriage, right, is simply the norm because the people in power say so. So when you act out sexually, you're questioning those values, you're questioning those mores in an attempt to kind of gain, again, this liberation that will eventually lead to this kind of communist, this utopia, right? Wherein there is no stratification along any lines, because all stratification is an expression of power, particularly political power. And that's why the sexual component of it is also very important to these people, because it is to the extent that you don't conform to normal sexual behavior, you are then outcast. And so somebody benefits from you being an outcast.
And the sexual component is at the root of our identity, being made in the image of God, like Blanche mentioned earlier, coming together and being fruitful and multiplying. Blanche, can you read the super chats for us, please?
Yes.
Thank you all so much for contributing to this show.
First, we have Cruise Missile. Cruise Missile, thank you so much for the super sticker. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Next, we have Willie Dodd. None of this makes sense. Even if there was alleged book banning, it doesn't mean one can obtain the books away from the school library. The left wants easy indoctrination and control. That is true. Thank you, Willie Doc. Thank you. I'll be unsure. Thank you for the super sticker. CC777, thank you for the super sticker. Martin Towns, happy I grew up when teachers weren't trying to tell you who they were sleeping with and rainbows were associated with lucky charms. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin, again. The left acts like conservatives are trying to ban Dr. Seuss books, something they actually tried to ban, by the way. Stop the cap. We don't want sexuality in schools. school reading material. It's not controversial. Thank you, Martin Towns. Thank you. CC777, thank you again for the super sticker. And then Jesus Loves You. God bless the chat. Chuck, Blanche, Gothics, and Quisha, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't need the kids to and I'm not one of these people who are like, oh, I just don't want gay sex to be taught. I don't want the little kids to be learning about any kind of sex. It's not like I'm like, oh, keep, like the anal stuff. I don't want them to do that. But, men and women just like getting it. I don't want that either. Let me be clear. I don't want that either. Let's see. Let's play this one. This guy is always an idiot. Let's see what he has to say.
Educator referred to a black child as a slave during class. They're going to learn at some point. In Harris County, Texas, an educator told black honor student she could have been sold down south while teaching a lesson on slavery. During a press conference on April 5th, the girl's mother is calling for firing. The teacher had used her as an example of a fugitive slave, the mother said. Now, you may be saying, well, Doc, that is inappropriate. Maybe it was a good faith mistake. All right. Well, how about this? This wasn't the first time this educator has been caught up going off script. Her beliefs about the antebellum period got in trouble. The teacher allegedly told the class the Confederate flag was a symbol of Southern pride and had nothing to do with slavery. See, that's exactly what the KKK says about it. I'm keeping it 100. That is what they say about it. There's more. And was about states' rights. Two facts many of the history books have wrong. There should be no question. The educator should not educate children.
Well, first of all, it's funny that he has a problem with a black child being referred to as, saying that they would have been sold in slavery because he's constantly saying that black people are oppressed. Right. Like, doesn't that validate your point? Like, that's what y'all say all the time.
Right.
That if you're black, you're oppressed. If you're white, he literally says this all the time. So what is the problem? Why did he have a problem when the teacher just literally basically said in so many words everything that he's already saying? Like, what's the big deal? I don't get it. Why is it a big deal, Gothics?
Because he's an idiot. I have no other explanation for that. These people, you're totally right. I am so exhausted with these people talking about slavery and my ancestors and 400 years of oppression. And once someone literally parrots the same script that you talk a lot about, now all of a sudden it's a problem. It's like when anti-racists are racists and then they don't realize that they're being racist. It's like, okay, racism is bad, but in our context, it's totally fine. Right. So it's like they just want to have control over the narrative. Right. And to me, it's just selective outrage, because then you get stupidity like that clip.
That's another foundation of their whole ideology: power. Control and power. Like, we don't really care about, your struggles as a trans person, your struggle as a black person, racism. We just want to tear down the system and put ourselves in charge. Like, and we will use whomever and whatever to get to that point. Go ahead, Chuck.
I want to ask you a question. Somebody is asking about the LGBTQ agenda coming from communism, and they were asking about some literature, and they all said that their parents came from Cuba, but somehow they became libtards, even though their parents came from Cuba.
Wow. You know what? I live in Florida, and I used to live in Miami, and there are a lot of left-leaning Cubans, and so Miami, I think Miami still went blue, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I could be wrong. But But
I thought Miami-Dade County, I thought it went red in 2025. I don't know, I could be wrong, but go ahead.
There are, my point is there are a lot of left-leaning Cubans down there. So I'm really not even surprised, because it's their children have been, like the ones who fled Cuba under Castro, their children they went into the school system, and then they got indoctrinated. It's not funny. It's just ironic. You know what I mean? But yeah, so their kids are, they're left leaning, and they do believe this stuff, unfortunately. And I think this shows you that even if you are, you could have fled Cuba, you could have done all these things, if you were not teaching your children yourself what was up and literally digging into what was going on in the schools, you would not know. And you would think, okay, we're cool. Of course, I've talked to my kids about, what was going on, but you didn't put it in today's context. You know what I mean? And so their kids end up being following along with this stuff. That's my 2 cents.
What was the question? Just the first part of the question was about. Can you repeat it for me, Blanche, please? The first part of that question.
They were questioning the link from the LGBTQ agenda coming from communism, and then they mentioned that their parents fled from Cuba, and so they were trying to understand I guess Fidel Castro being communist, and how could communism be linked to LGBTQ?
LGBTQ. Yeah. Well, it's a very complicated, complex story. It goes all the way back to the beginning when you saw a lot of Central European theoreticians speculating as to why, of course, these communist revolutions didn't occur in places like England and France and the United States, saying countries that were in the stage of what Marx referred to as advanced capitalism. Of course, we saw the first country in Russia that attempted to institute these Marxian theories and make it the foundational premise of their governing structures. That occurred, of course, in Russia first, and Russia was still like a feudal society, a more feudal economy. It wasn't like the United States or England, where Marx originally prophesied a lot of these communist revolutions would occur first, because of course the dialectical process occurs in these various economic stages, right, where each stage sort of begets its own negation. And so this is what gave rise to what we all know today as the Frankfurt School, when you had a lot of Marxist theoreticians were trying to come up with a way to explain why Marx was wrong, but yet still right. And so they began to explore other ideas and say, well, what did Karl Marx miss? What did Karl Marx get left? What did he leave out? And so in the beginning, when the Frankfurt School, or what was called the Institute for Social Research at Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany, all of these Marxist theoreticians in Central Europe and in places like Germany, Austria, and Hungary came together to figure out, okay, well, how can we, not so much explain why, but it took more of what they call ideology and praxis, or putting praxis, how they say it, pretty much, how do we implement these theories as opposed to just sitting back and trying to explain how things are from a dispassionate standpoint, right? Philosophy kind of took on a more activist dimension. And you had one of the earliest Frankfurt School acolytes, a Hungarian communist by the name of Georg Lukács. Georg Lukács was one of the first Marxist theoreticians to institute these ideas of this kind of sexual hedonism to the peoples of Hungary in order to break their society down culturally to make them more susceptible to communist takeover. Because communists realized that order, right, this kind of stability, because anytime you have stability, Stability, yes, hierarchies can be oppressive, as Jordan Peterson likes to eloquently remind us of. Yes, hierarchies can be oppressive, but there is some good to hierarchies. Hierarchies do provide us with a preset of conditions that inform us, those who belong or who find ourselves within the confines of any given hierarchy, what particular tools and habits and so on and so forth that we need to cultivate in order to move up the ranks of the hierarchy, because we will be rewarded by our peers for having done a good thing. And so herein lies where a hierarchy actually receives its values. And so hierarchies, yes, they can be oppressive, but hierarchies also stabilize. And to quote James Lindsay, Marxists hate anything that stabilizes. And one of the key things that stabilizes society, of course, is the relationship between male and female, proper sexual relationships, and so on and so forth. We can go all the way back to Friedrich Engels when he wrote The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. Okay, so you promote sexual hedonism, it wrecks a society because it becomes unstable, and thus it can no longer function, which clears the ground for a creation of something new to take its place. So you had Georg Lukács in the beginning. Then you also had Wilhelm Reich, who wrote the essay Sexual Revolution that was published in the late 1930s. He was another member of the Frankfurt School until he was eventually thrown out of the Frankfurt School because even his ideas were too radical for his contemporaries. Then you fast forward to the 1960s, you have the father of the gay liberation movement, a man by the name of Harry Hay, who joined the Communist Party because he believed that the Communist Party and its principles were more in line with his sexual sensibilities, which he tied to, right, all these ideas about rebellion and revolution and all of these things. And then last point, you had a man named Carl Whitman, who was the leader of something called the Red Butterfly Collective, who wrote the Gay Manifesto in 1970. And so there's been this long link. And mind you, for the longest time, the Communist Party had a kind of, they kind of didn't allow, or they didn't necessarily question their members on whether or not they were gay or whatever the case may be, but you couldn't be openly homosexual because during the heyday of the Cold War, and it's going on all over the world, and people who were engaging in all sorts of espionage in their native countries on behalf of Joseph Stalin, you couldn't be openly gay because they believed that made you too susceptible to blackmail. And so they were kind of critical of homosexuals until after Joseph Stalin's death. And then came the New Left in the 1960s, hence Harry Hay and Carl Whitman, Michel Foucault, who was openly gay, another French leftist, Jean Genet, he was openly gay. And then things began to change, and you saw more of this queer pedagogy once, Frankfurt School acolytes such as Theodor Adorno and, Herbert Marcuse, when they became more and more prevalent, and they introduced these ideas into the ranks of the communist left, not just in America, but the world over. And so that was a long-winded answer, but there's no way to give you a good answer and make it short, because, you're talking about a history from the 1920s to all the way to the 1960s with the dawn of the New Left. So you're talking about 30, 40 years of history.
I would add Alfred Kinsey to the New Left also. Play this clip.
On May 10th, 1933, in dozens of cities across Germany, students and Nazi Party officials gathered books they had deemed subversive and un-German and stood in lines, waiting to throw the tomes into the flames of raging bonfires Nazi soldiers had set in the middle of town squares across the country. Upwards of 80,000 books were burned that night. The act was a concerted and symbolic effort to tell the people of Germany and the people of the world that a new Germany was being born, a pure Germany. That night, the students that were gathered around the flames swore an oath to combat and destroy subversive and un-German literature. 6 years later, Germany would invade Poland, starting what would become the deadliest conflict in world history. In the apocryphal words of German poet Heinrich Heine, whose books were burned that night, along with books by Ernest Hemingway, Helen Keller, and Jack London, where they burn books, they will also ultimately burn people.
Heinrich Heine was another communist, and he's the one who introduced Marx to the Communist Party. But go ahead, Keisha, you about to say something.
When you were talking about Hungary, I wanted to mention, I think that is where, when they had their uprising, it was moms, it was parents who came out and stopped all that foolishness, if I'm not mistaken. So shout out to all the parents who've been working and trying to get this stuff out of the school systems. But so that clip was showing how Hitler, and then they burned all these books, and some of them were actually bad books. I'm not condoning burning them, but some of them were bad books. And some people now, Chuck, not saying Chuck is doing this, but Chuck knows where I'm going. Some people now are saying, well, hey, look, this group of people burned books. So they must have been, they burned these kind of books. So they must have been on the right track. They must have been good people. What do you guys think?
I mean, I don't think any books. Well, first of all, I mean, we're in America, so here in America, we shouldn't be burning anybody's books. And again, this whole book banning is taken out of proportion. The books aren't being banned. The books are just not allowed in schools. Again, school is a small segment of society. You have public schools and you got everything else. So you can have those books in Starbucks. You can have those books in Barnes and Nobles. You can have those books, them books can be everywhere, public libraries. But the issue is the books being in school and the materials being inappropriate. Why does a child have to visually see what a threesome is? What's that going to do for the child? Like, why do they have to know how gay people have sex? It don't make any sense. Like, again, the books are not being banned. They even the whole phrase is gaslighting, banning books. No, the books aren't being banned at all. Like, what was the 2 Live Crew banned in the USA? Rap music wasn't being banned. They were trying to censor the music to children. Again, this is not about banning anything. It's about what's age appropriate for children. And again, like the lady asked, what does a strap-on? Why should a child know about a strap-on? Joy Reid, can you please answer that question? Bald-headed Joy Reid.
Somebody said in the chat earlier, they're like, she hates Trump, but she loves his hairstyle. Speaking of Joy Reid, I'm gonna go ahead and play her clip. Play this because this was really. I'm glad Chad is in here, but this is really good because let's just go ahead and play it.
Why should 13 people get to decide what books tens of thousands of children get to read?
Well, I'm thinking it's probably because those 13 people saw what some of the content was in the books. I mean, explicit, graphic, sexual content. And I'm happy to talk about some of that content if you'd like to.
Well, this is the question again. The books that are being banned, I want to give you just some.
Hold on a second. Well, no, Joy, but I want to be clear. No one's banning books. Write the book, print the book, publish the book, put the book in the public library, sell the book, right? We're talking about a public school library. Children don't have unfettered access to the internet at school. I did a FOIA records request, and I wanted to see what kinds of internet sites are banned in schools, if we're going to talk about banning, right? And the subject matter in the books that moms are concerned about are the same things that kids don't have access to on the internet.
What is the expertise that you have and other Moms for Liberty advocates have to decide that a book, an award-winning book like All Boys Aren't Blue, isn't appropriate for students to read? What is your expertise?
What a tragic story of a young man who's anally raped by his adult family member. So you have incest, rape, pedophilia. Joy, you said you'd let me answer, so I'm going to answer
Please
for you. In what context is a strap-on dildo acceptable for public school? Just I mean, that's my question to you. Tell me what the context around the strap-on dildo or the rape of a minor child by a teacher.
Hold on a second.
No,
Wait,
we're talking about public school.
One moment.
All right.
So now you've asked me questions.
Sure.
I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
Well, who is the main character? What's the name of the main character in All Boys Are Blue?
You're asking me right now.
You just
the
gave
name?
me very specific information about this book, so you're presenting yourself as somebody expert.
It's the gentleman.
Hold on. Who's the main character in the book?
The main character is the author.
What's his name?
George, I believe, is his first name.
Because you're giving me very specific information that is.
You're asking me to remember the name of an author.
You
the
just
name of the
remembered
author
very
doesn't
specific names.
Joy.
Here's my
We're
question.
talking about
Here's my
strap.
question.
You didn't answer my question.
No. I'm going to answer your
Great.
question.
I would love to hear that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm interviewing you and you're not interviewing me. So let's just make sure it's a conversation. Okay,
great.
So what I'm saying to you is that as you are not an expert in this book,
I don't have to be an expert to know that dildos aren't appropriate for public school. I mean, come on, let's get real.
Is a full context story, as you said, of the author's experience. Why is it your right or a Moms for Liberty activist's right to say that a parent who wants their child to have access to this book, which gives a personal experience of this author, why doesn't a liberal parent, for instance, or a parent of an LGBTQ kid, why don't they have a right for their child to just have access to this book? Why is it your right to say they can't?
So again, we're talking about incest, rape, and pedophilia.
And
Joy,
each parent, each parent has to decide what is appropriate for their child to read. So I want you to answer. I'm going to ask you one more time. What is your right to tell a parent who wants their child, who might feel seen by this story? Why don't they have the right? Why don't they have the right as a parent to say, my child can have access to this book?
If a child feels seen by this story, that means that they have been the victim of a predator. That means that they have either been raped by a family member, they've experienced
and your proof of that is what?
You just said that
What's
if a
your
child
proof of
feels
that?
seen by this story. What I'm saying, Joy,
you're now making assumptions about it.
Joy, but if a child has been raped, we should do a lot better than put a book on a library
Now you're literally
shelf.
creating a story behind a child that you don't know.
Good God. I mean, we had okay, let me first say this. I feel bad for Joy. Like, I mean, I do. Like, this woman, she has either sold you are so far gone into this cult that you can't see your way, in which I feel bad for you, or you are so you are wide-eyed and you know this stuff is wrong, but you believe this stuff is right and good, in which I feel bad for you. Also, she is a mother. She has 3 children, and she is saying, what's the big deal about little kids learning about perversion? What's your expertise to know that little kids shouldn't see dildos? You got to be an expert on this in order for Joy Reid to have to even listen to what you got to say, because by Joy's her account, you can't just intuitively know that this is wrong. I guess you got to have like some degree, or you got to be maybe you need to be like the White House press secretary or something like that for her to even think that you can have an opinion that is different from hers on this topic. Like, it's mind blowing.
It still wouldn't matter, Quisha, because even if she had a doctorate in this stuff, it wouldn't matter, because she's gonna say she's racist. Like, they'll just keep moving the cheese, because there's no way to critique it in her eyes. It should just be in the schools. That's why, and again, she didn't want to answer that question, because like Chuck said, if she reads, like at that one, I guarantee before she came on that show, they told her, you cannot read any excerpts from the book. I guarantee the producer said that to that woman. You can't do it. I guarantee it. So Joy Reid knows what she's doing. And then if we take off Joy Reid, you ever seen RoboCop when he put his helmet off?
Yeah.
If we take off Joy Reid's little hairpiece, look like RoboCop. I just want you to say that, because her hairpiece is all the way back. Like, it's crazy. She got the George.
She got the what? The George Jefferson.
She got the George Jefferson. That thing pushed all the way back. But
oh, that bothers my soul. That woman is gone.
Yeah, she's just prideful. I don't feel sorry for her. She's prideful and she's trying to appeal to authority. Like, what expertise do you have? Well, what about you, Joy? What expertise do you have? Because you seem to be not neutral in this conversation. You seem to be right. You're moving the goalposts. So
She went to Harvard.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. So, I almost wish that the woman that was on the show would have just stuck to asking Joy questions, because I think that would have been better to put her into a corner, because now you have to, because she got her, if you heard, she was like, oh, so what about liberal parents and LGBTQ kids that want to feel seen? So, okay, so you're saying that liberal kids are like what, sexually assaulted? Like, so this is your argument that you're making, and now you're conveniently like you have amnesia and you don't remember saying this.
Yeah, that would have been a good way to back her into a corner to make her answer her own questions and assumptions about the book. What were you gonna say, Chuck?
No, just Joy Reid, man. Before you have played that clip though, Quisha, I just wanted to backpedal a second, just to go back to the image of the Nazis, burning the books. It just really upsets me how the left can constantly get away with this, can constantly get away with giving the whole Nazi, the whole Hitler title to just continue to put that on American conservatives. It's just I'm so sick and tired of it. This is something that I'll probably have to revisit sometime in the near future. Again, because being a conservative in the United States means something slightly different from what it would mean to be a conservative in Europe, for example, proper. You're talking, say, for example, someone who was at the founding of our country, right? You had certain folks who, they were considered Federalists, or they were considered even Royalists, some of them, who still wish for the United States to be under the provision of the British Empire. And so when you're talking about these different political perspectives and how we define the political spectrum, i.e. left versus right, it's not a simple thing that you can just define in a few sentences, because how you perceive the political spectrum with respect to the left-right paradigm has everything to do with where you are and when you are there. Because the United States foundational principles, its Bill of Rights and its Declaration of Independence, does not center around the Volk or the Reich or the race. It doesn't center around that. All right. So when you're looking at the dichotomy between German socialists and Russian socialists, right, you're talking about two different systems. One is sort of like race first. This other one has this class first dynamic, because as Karl Marx once famously said, that the proletarian people, or a true Marxist, is a, quote, person without a homeland. But Germany had this intense Volkish commitment to this whole Aryan sensibility that, again, just goes back to some great past of that Germany had prior to, but anyway, point is, you're talking about two different dictatorial systems, one under the control of Adolf Hitler, the other at the time under the control of Joseph Stalin, both vying for control over which country would be the proper representation of some of Marx's theories and beliefs and perspectives overall. And so when you see this kind of book burning, again, you're looking at a rivalry between two separate dictatorial factions that believe that they can create a perfect society without God, but instead one that is maintained and held together by the state. And again, this is something that they both share. This is something that they both have in common. And so it really bugs me again when you see this kind of book burning, because the Nazis, they mean, any ideas that was outside of the, I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, they didn't like Albert Einstein, right? Because they considered, said Albert Einstein's brand of physics to be what they call Jewish science. So I didn't like Albert Einstein. I mean, they didn't like, so again, it's just that really bugs me when I see that, because like Blanchard, so this is not what this is. She's sitting up there, she's talking about, well, how about, a liberal parent or a parent who has an LGBTQ child? What if they want their? It's like, well, hello, Joy, that's what it means. I mean, we live in a society where we have, a democracy, right? That's the word that they like, or at least a society that is governed by and large by at least democratic principles. I mean, when do we start kowtowing to the minority on such controversial issues? And if you want your child, and if you want your child to have access to these books, why don't you go buy it? Let them read it themselves, or why don't you teach it to them, right? I mean, no one is stopping, to go back to a point I think all of us have made at some point here. No one is preventing your child from reading whatever sorts of books that you will allow them to read. Period, point blank. I mean, so what exactly, what is this woman talking about? But like Blanche said, I guarantee you that they wouldn't let that woman read from the book, chapter and verse. They wouldn't let her do that, not on air. No, because then you'll see that. And you notice how Jerry, she didn't answer the question, right? She didn't answer the question. She didn't want to answer the question. All right.
They probably was going crazy in her ear. Move on, Joy. Just move on. Move on.
That's exactly what they were doing. That's exactly what they were telling her. Move on.
Yeah. But they know that by doing this, in their minds, they are bringing the child into this new state of being, essentially creating a new man, creating a new human being that is going to be ripe, or one that can properly function in this new world, this new transhumanist world that they have envisioned for tomorrow, right? So, because then, and it's funny, Quisha, because that's what they believe their job is as an educator. That's what they believe their job is.
They do. That's what I mean. You hear them say it all the time. They gladly and will quickly take control over, take responsibility for your children. Oh, these are our children. Well, back up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? They tell you this all the time, that this is what they think. Oh, these are our kids. I mean, from Randy Weingarten, who's the head of one of the biggest teachers union, to your local social studies teacher. They have no problem saying, these are our kids. I love my kids. They're my own kids. And it's like, it sounds good when it's just, oh, Sarah down the street, she grew up to be a kindergarten teacher. That's so great and wonderful. This ain't Sarah, little Sarah down the street. This is Sarah from Massachusetts, who went and got a degree in teaching, and then now she's back in your city ready to take over your child. Okay, you don't know anything about these people. They are strangers.
And Quisha, let's just talk about too how they have completely Marxified the educational process by not looking at, particularly as it pertains to the humanities. You're talking literature, you're talking, English literature, for crying out loud. When you read everything from Shakespeare on down, Ernest Hemingway or Mark Twain or Charles Dickens, it doesn't matter who it is, right? Wordsworth, John Milton, doesn't matter who it is. Your goal and objective as an educator is to get the child, essentially, to get into the mind of the person who wrote the piece, right? To sort of get why it is that they put that out, so that you can then know, okay, well, how is this particular thing here meant to condition me to accept my status as an oppressed minority, right? To try to find, and this is the whole object of the whole critical pedagogy, is to try to get to the bottom of, well, how is this thing that I am learning here meant to oppress me? And so when they say certain things like, well, representation, or people want to see themselves, when at the University of Pennsylvania's English department, when they removed a couple of years ago, a photograph of William Shakespeare and replaced it with Audre Lorde, right? This was for what, right? For representation. Okay. But see, here's what they do, right? Again, if you were to just promote something that's classically considered by their standards, at least, to be Christian, white, male, or heterosexual, that in and of itself is an example of intolerance. And I'm going to tell you why, because here's directly a quote from the aforementioned Repressive Tolerance essay written by Herbert Marcuse that was published in 1969. This is a brief excerpt from the essay where he describes two examples of tolerance. One example, he calls it passive tolerance. The other is what he describes as pure tolerance. Now, this is kind of what I described earlier when I was kind of talking in circles, because it's hard to really explain the way these people think. But here's Marcuse in his own words. He says, the passive toleration of entrenched and established attitudes and ideas, even if their damaging effect on man and nature is evident. That's passive tolerance. And the active, official tolerance granted to the right, it's political right, granted to the right as well as the left, to movements of aggression as well as to movements of peace, to the party of hate as well as that of humanity. I call this non-partisan tolerance, abstract or pure, in as much as it refrains from taking sides, but in doing so, it actually protects already established machinery of discrimination. So when you as an educator say that I'm going to dispassionately present to my students controversial issues and speak on behalf of established experts who have something to say on both sides of the issue, teach the technicalities of learning and all that other good stuff, and allow my students to formulate their own ideas. When you do that, you are protecting already established machineries of discrimination when you don't take a side. So what you must do is, of course, take the side of the left, which is the side that proclaims and purports to be on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized, etc., etc. And so you must speak for that side whilst repressing the other side in order to bring about the preferred end, which is a state of actual tolerance, right? Because if we promote this idea of tolerance, given the current state of society, it simply leads to more intolerance. So you must suppress the right and promote the left.
Well, how do you do that, Chuck, in America? Like this, how is that supposed to, I mean, I'm asking this question.
I know.
How do you do that in a country where we want to be, we want to hear the different ideas? Like that's kind of that's partly why this country was even established in the first place. It's so hard to hear the ideas of the left and like allow them to, I'm not saying that I'm trying to get rid of them or anything like that. I'm just saying it's their worldview, because they are trying to suppress ours. It's hard to be in nation. It's hard to be in community with them. You know what I mean? Like how are you supposed to do that? Because they want a one-sided, I mean, I guess it's tyrannical. That's what they want to do. It's tyrannical at its root. It's not trying to coexist, even though that's what they say, but it's not.
And that's why, Quisha, that's why it's a secular faith. It's a secular faith, because it's again it takes on a religious character. This belief. Because religious law, of course, is absolute, right? Secular law, i.e. politics, is the realm of negotiation, right? We can negotiate within the political realm, but when it comes to religious law, right, it's final, because God's word is final. God's word is supreme. You don't argue with that, right? But in the Christian world, right, particularly here in the United States, where our particular system is undergirded by the more, I guess, the Protestant strain of Christianity. More specifically, we don't go about things the same way in which, say, for example, a lot of countries do in the Muslim world. And so this is how you have peace. You have peace through negotiation, and you negotiate within the realm of politics. You don't negotiate within the realm of religion, or within the realm of the religious. And so again, I'm talking religious law versus, again, the secular law. And so the idea of the Enlightenment, to kind of drive the point home, because I feel like I'm fumbling it, but to drive the point home, the Enlightenment principle, right, or classical liberalism that came out of the Enlightenment, was this idea that it is only through the political process can we even imagine having something tantamount to peace. Because religion, or having a society that is I guess functioning on the basis of religion and religion alone, can only lead to ongoing conflict. So the political side of things must be secular in nature, because under the jurisdiction of any given political entity is going to be a multitude of people who are going to think different things, who are going to believe different things. And we do not command that people, right, for example, convert to Christianity at the point of the sword. We don't we don't do that here.
No, we
And
don't.
so this was the whole attitude, and this was to promote, and so that freedom, not just so that freedom could abound, but so that peace could abound, because salvation, redemption, is a personal act. Again, this is why, again, I repeat, the Protestant strand of Christianity is the strain that undergirds the United States, hence Max Weber and the Protestant ethic, right? Because it's a personal thing. And so the state, this is why it's about the separation of church and state, and we don't, the reason being is so that freedom can abound, because of course, our framers were picking up on the examples that they had to draw from, because for the longest time the European subcontinent was racked with all sorts of religious conflicts between Protestants and Catholics and so on and so forth. But to them, again, considering the fact that that is a secular faith, Quisha, again, it is absolute, right? It cannot be negotiated. So to your question, it's like, dang, man, how do we coexist, with these people, right?
Yeah.
Who don't respect, right, certain things that Christianity promotes, like, right, common grace and equal protection under the law. How does how does this work? Well, again, if you have to have the conspiratorial mind of a leftist, the whole idea of common grace and equal protection under the law is simply a bourgeois conspiracy meant to protect the property rights of the privileged. And so on and so forth. This is why even when you read, Quisha, like Critical Race Theory and Introduction by Delgado and Stefanchi, they talk about this stuff, where critical liberalism, the philosophy or the theory of incrementalism and negotiation and these sorts of things, that's all poppycock. That's just nonsense meant to protect the status quo. What we need is extremism. What we need is radicalism. We need revolution.
It's been around for thousands of years, but somehow it's all hogwash. So Gothics, as we're wrapping this up, do you think that ultimately the Marxian goal is to move people away from the God of the Bible to their own God? Is that ultimately like the point of their whole thing? Just to move you from the, a tried and tested and true, a way to do society, which has been very successful under the Christian way. Is it to move us from that to this?
I think it depends who you ask. I think people that identify as Marxist, you could argue that that is the goal. But I think for a lot of people that follow Marxist thoughts, they will go along with the ideology, and that will end up being the result anyway, because Marxism it cannot coexist in the same universe of Christianity. Like, it's just an inversion of the Bible and everything that is good and true. And so that's what you're going to end up getting, because ultimately under Marxism is the people sitting up at the top, they want to be God. They want to be the final authority. And as you can see, they're weaponizing empathy and just pulling on people's heartstrings, calling everything bigoted and racist and things like that, because they know that that's going to move them closer to the end goal. Now, someone with a biblical worldview, they're going to be able to spot that a mile away. Someone who doesn't believe in God is going to have a harder time deciphering that, because what's so bad about ending racism and what's so bad about ending bigotry? That's all they see it. And so I've always said this, and I've pissed off a lot of people with this comment, but I don't really care. Marxists and communists love atheists. They love them because they are primed and they're more susceptible to adopting their stupid ideology because they don't know what to look for.
That's good. They do love the atheists. Yeah. I know Manning Johnson talks about how, you know, when they would find out that you were, I'm saying that wrong. Basically, like, they would kind of try to either stay away from those people of faith because they were harder to convert, or they would, just not try to let their true intents be known to those who were, believers, because it's like these two things just don't go together so well. So they had to go, they had to subvert, the churches in order for it to even exist. So
you get this very watered down version of Christianity that's palatable to people that aren't believers. And so they're playing the long game, and I think they're determined enough, but that's really the end goal, because if you can pull people away from God, you can pull people away from objective truth and objective morality, and then you can destabilize society and people become desperate. When things get really bad, people are going to start looking for hope, and I guess in that case, your hope is the government.
Ooh, that is so sad. Like, that is so, it's sad, and it still doesn't make sense. Like, I asked a family member once, I was like, okay, so let me get this straight. The government that had all the slavery and has done all the Jim Crow, the slavery, the redlining, and all these bad things that you keep telling me about, that's the same government that I'm supposed to trust?
It's because there wasn't enough black people in the government. So now you just need enough black people in the government, and then the government will be fine. That's their logic, not mine.
But Joe, but you elected Joe Biden, though. He's not black. The math ain't nothing.
Again, Joe Biden was against Trump. So it's what they put this stuff against. So it's like, if you were against Trump, then technically you black. They just simplify it. It's just like, if you wear the mask, you're a good person. If you don't wear the mask, you're trying to kill everybody. It's just like they use the same tactic. So it ain't just them saying, we elected Joe Biden. They said Joe Biden is against Donald Trump, just like Kamala Harris against Donald Trump. She's not. Everybody knows she wasn't qualified for nothing, but she's against Donald Trump, so she qualified.
So what are they gonna do now? Because this is Trump. When Trump is out of there, what is gonna be their ploy then? Because there is no more bad guy.
Us, people like us, they're gonna say that America is domestic terrorism with people that think like this. People on the right, they have concern. They're gonna do a whole campaign, and they're gonna have all the talking points. If they believe that in Jesus, if they are conservative, if they don't want big government, like, they're gonna have a whole list of things. And if you meet that criteria, you're gonna be the new boogeyman.
You're the new Trump.
You the new Trump. That's what they're gonna say. The new Trump.
Trump. This is Trump's legacy. These are his MAGA extremists.
And they come in all shapes and sizes. They can be black. They can be white. They're gonna do a whole little campaign on the new Trump supporter.
So Chuck, I really wasn't even expecting us to land on God so heavy. I mean, we do that a lot around here, I guess, but I wasn't expecting to land there. But do you think ultimately part of their whole goal, or part of their goal, is to move you from traditional faith, Christianity, because that is the faith that has, it has uplifted the world out of poverty, out of, to become more civilized, all the things. You think it's ultimately a move to move people away from that and into their God?
Yeah, well, I think, well, let me just say too, you guys are talking about Trump and this sort of thing. What is the left going to do? Just as an aside, just say, for example, if conservatives, culturally start making headway, and there comes a time when I don't necessarily want to say conservative art per se, but I think you get my point, right? But talking art, politics, pretty much when the right, if it wins, or at least for a time being, and they for a time have nothing to complain about, I just wonder, what would they say then? What would they do then? What will a lot of your favorite social media content creators on the right have to say then, when there's no more reaction videos to make, when there's no more outrage toward the left? You'll see what a lot of them are really made of, what a lot of them really believe, what a lot of them really think. Because you have a lot of popular conservative content creators, but not very many conservative thinkers. There's a lot of people who know how to react to videos. But that's just an aside. That's just me, but I won't name names. I won't. But anyway, I'll just leave it there. Keisha, you said you said that are you trying to get, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And ultimately, it just goes to show you this kind of never-ending cycle that we're caught in as human beings, because in trying to mitigate the burden of our fleshly existence, we created, more abundance than human beings has ever known before. But at the same time, that doesn't really necessarily deal with a lot of the sort of moral and spiritual quandaries and quagmires that we will forever find ourselves in as human beings until peace is restored, right, by something beyond the natural, right? Something supernatural. And I alluded to this a couple of days ago when I did a live stream with Jericho Green, Craig Long, and Chad O. Jackson. I said, in many respects, what we're dealing with here is liberalism run amok, right? What you saw in the beginning of the 20th century, leading up to the First World War, is you saw, to quote Fulton Sheen, you saw secularism made flesh in 1914 in the form of the First World War. And then by the Second World War, again, we saw the rise of fascism and communism, which to me, and I know a lot of people may not want to hear this, but this was the sort of natural and logical extension. It was sort of classical liberalism taken to its extreme. And what I mean is, what liberalism did was it gave us a lot of good ideas, particularly to go back to Protestantism. It brought forth the humanist idea that the human himself has value, in that he does not need to rely upon any authority to not only to get to God as it pertained to the kind of the religious sort of authority that was imposed upon the peoples of Europe by way of the Roman Catholic hierarchy, but also the state with respect to the divine right of kings and these various things. And with the advent of the printing press, the more and more people became literate and they had access to knowledge and literacy and these sorts of things, power sort of diffused itself horizontally, and the common man had more power and more information at his disposal than he had ever had before. And this is a key reason why someone like Karl Marx was quite partial to Martin Luther, because he believed that the Protestant Reformation was one step towards this outright abandonment of religion or Christianity as a whole. Once you get rid of the church authority, i.e. the Catholic Church, everyone will essentially become their own God. And this is what would lay the groundwork to this more kind of liberal form of theology until everyone essentially, again, became their own God. And so when you have these liberal ideas, you know, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and all of these things, right? It was supposed to, and it did, you know, it worked in many respects. But at the same time, the people who clung too heavily to that idea and the promise of the Enlightenment by the 20th century looked around and still saw problems. They still saw, you know, wars and hunger, and they still saw things that they found this place. And they said, wow, we're making all of these discoveries, and man, we have elevated ourselves to the point where we now have dignity again, right? You know, we don't believe that mortification is the frame of mind of the day, right, so to speak. But yet still they looked around and they still saw problems. And that's because I think that ultimately the Enlightenment worked so well that it led to this abandonment of God, which leads to a ton of problems. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much suffering there is in the world, right, it's still okay, because when it's all said and done, there's still God. And I think we've forgotten that.
That leaves a lot of questions. What do we do with, I'm not even going to get all into it, but I mean, there is a fine line, you know, between liberalism and or individuality, and you know, where you go your own way. Like where is that? You know, being an individual, uniquely and wonderfully made, and to turning that into you know, being your own God. That's
a seriously deep philosophical question, because you cannot imagine even the Enlightenment even taking place without the Protestant Reformation. You can't even fathom it. And so it is difficult to, and again, these are some deep philosophical questions that people don't want to deal with. They just think, oh, the Catholic Church, oh, corrupt, rich, wealthy, this and that. And so they don't want to ask themselves these hard questions. I'm not trying to make a special plea for people to convert to Catholicism. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you see the importance, right, of the main thesis, which is the crux of the Greek tragedy, so to speak, is that, right, no matter what we do as human beings, no matter what we try, we will always fail. But we must still keep a smile on our face, because we have a moral obligation to remain happy, says God, because in the end, we look forward to that time thereafter where we can be in eternity. Because you have to think, these people are so upset and furious and unhappy with themselves, because think about this, Quisha. Even if they are capable, and this is something I picked up from the great Richard Wurmbrand. He was a Jewish Lutheran who spent 14 years in a Romanian prison as a political prisoner when Romania was under communism. And he says something very interesting in his book, God's Underground, where he talks about his experience in a Romanian prison, being tortured for being a pastor and for preaching the gospel. And mind you, he was born a Jew, became an atheist, and converted to Christianity. He said that even if these people are capable of creating this perfect society, right? Perfect, where everybody's taken care of, everything is plentiful, everything is just so wonderful, right? They still have to deal with the existential dread that they have swirling in their minds, because they still have to confront the reality that eventually it'll all be gone. Because no matter what, you're still going to die. If you can create, imagine, now you and I, we dealing with the stuff is because we thinking like, dang, stuff is messed up, but I'm going to get to that promised land, and that's going to be forever one day.
Amen.
They're saying to themselves, I'm going to try to create a finite paradise without knowing or whilst believing that once it's over, I will never experience this joy again. That has to be terrifying to the psyche of someone who sees the world the way they do.
My goodness. That's
because
deep,
you're still
y'all.
going to die.
That's probably why they're so
much
aggressive.
to say. I'm not gonna say, but I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No, that's why they're so aggressive, because this is the final stop for them. It's either
yeah.
this or nothing.
Dang.
And if it's the final stop for them, then guess what? It's the final stop for y'all too. Listen, so they're not doing this trip alone. They're not gonna die alone. Trust me. Everybody with them. Everybody got to go.
Everybody got to go. We're gonna again burning it down and standing inside. It's man, it really. This is a really great conversation. I feel like my heart for these people has actually softened after this conversation, because I'm listening to Joy and I'm listening, and then everything that everybody has said, and the chat and everybody, it really shows you how jacked up these people are. Like, but for the grace of God, like, yo, I'm so happy I'm not in that anymore. Thank you, Jesus. I could have been one of those people. I could be on a clip. Okay, y'all could be, I could actually be on a clip, y'all. Thank you, Jesus. Okay. Thank you, Lord. God, thanks. Thank you for coming on. You were amazing. We'd love to have you back anytime.
Yeah, thank you guys for inviting me. Love the convo.
Thank you so much. To the best chat on the internet on a Sunday night. Thank you guys. Sorry for the moderation. Y'all know I don't even know half of what was going on in the chat. So my bad. But Blanche, do we have any more super chats or anything to read?
I think we have one more.
Okay.
CC777, America first, USA, lowercase USA. God bless America.
Yes, God bless America. Thank you for that. I think this was a great conversation. It felt like we were kind of doing a throwback with the books and stuff, but they are bringing this stuff up again with all of Trump's, his executive orders and things like that. But great conversation. We will see you guys next Sunday, 7:30-ish, because, we still Black, Thanks for watching. Bye.